Imagine a country where over 2 million people claim tax deductions on properties that are losing money. Sound crazy, right? Well, welcome to Australia, where a controversial tax strategy called negative gearing has a nation divided. Now, you might be worrying that negative gearing is pricing out of your dream home or potentially making it so you can't afford your rent. That's why today we're going to explore negative gearing, what it means if you're trying to buy your first home, or if you're a renter and how it impacts you. I'm going to look at negative gearing from a neutral perspective. We're going to explore what it actually is in plain English, who's really benefiting from it, how it impacts the housing market, what might happen if you get rid of it, and most importantly, what it means for you. Whether you're a renter, home buyer, or dreaming of buying your first property, understanding negative gearing is critical. Ultimately, it's shaping the Australian housing market, influencing government policies, and impacting your financial future. Before I dive in, please give us a thumbs up. It means a lot to the channel, and if you want more content like this, feel free to subscribe below. Welcome to the Buying Your First Home podcast, your personal guide through the Australian housing market. Here we tackle the big questions and the small details that come up when buying your first home. From financial prep to finding the right neighbourhood, we're here to ensure that you've got all the knowledge at your fingertips. So let's take the first step towards unlocking the door to your new home. So let's dive right in. Negative gearing 101. So what exactly is negative gearing? In simple terms, it's when you borrow money to invest in a property, but the cost of owning that property, like the home loan interest, maintenance costs, and taxes, are more than the income you're earning from rent. And instead of making money, you're actually losing money each week by holding onto that property. Sounds crazy, right? But the kicker is the Australian taxation system lets you deduct that loss from your taxable income. Let me put the jargon aside and break it down with an example. Meet Steve, a standard Aussie investor. Steve buys an investment property for $670,000 in 8 Mile Plains. In Queensland, it's a 3-bedroom townhouse. He gets $625 a week rent, but his expenses are $1,019 a week. That's $919 in mortgage interest and $100 for other costs. That means Steve is losing $394 per week by holding onto his property. And here's where negative gearing comes in. Steve can deduct a $394 loss from his taxable income. If he's in the 32.5% tax bracket, he's saving about $128 in tax per week. And you might be wondering, why would anyone deliberately want to lose money on an investment? Well, Steve's banking on the property value going up over time. He's hoping that when he sells, the capital gain will make up more than those weekly losses. And let's be honest, it probably will if the property market keeps going the way it's been going. The property market for units has grown 6.7% on average over the past 10 years. If we extend that growth rate forward, it means his property will be worth nearly $1.1 million in 10 years' time. So he would lose $130,000 due to negative gearing, but gain $430,000 in property value. So he's actually making a $300,000 profit on the property over this time frame. Take into account the $140,000 deposit he's made, it translates into a 223% return on his investment at an annualized growth rate of 12.47%. That makes a better investment than the stock market on average. And that's not even taking rent growth into account. If the annual rent continues to grow at its 10-year average, he's also reducing his losses each year, which means it's more profit. So you can see why Steve would be happy to take some losses on his property. If he didn't have negative gearing, he'd only make a net profit of $225,000 at an annualized return rate of 10%, much less of an attractive investment. Negative gearing has been around for a long time. It's been part of the Australian taxation system since 1936, the same year sliced bread was first sold in the country. Originally, it wasn't specifically designed for property investment. It was just a general rule that if you borrow money to earn income, you can deduct it from the interest. Fast forward today, and negative gearing has become a big deal in the Australian property market. In the 21 financial year, around 2.25 million Australians claim negative gearing deductions. That's about 8.5% of their total population. So why does it matter to you? Well, whether or not you're trying to buy your first home, looking for investment, or just trying to find an affordable place to rent, negative gearing is playing a role in shaping the property market that you're dealing with. Which brings us to our next question. Is negative gearing a clever investment strategy or a bit of a tax route for the rich? Let's find out. This topic has really been dividing economists, politicians, and everyday Australians. So what's all the fuss about? On one side, we have those who argue that negative gearing is inflating property prices, making it harder for first home buyers to just get into the market. The argument usually goes like this. Negative gearing makes property investment more attractive due to its tax benefits. More investors in the market mean increased competition for properties, and the increased demand drives up house prices. Dr. Judith Yates from the University of Sydney puts it bluntly. She believes negative gearing has contributed to house prices being 9% higher than otherwise would have been. That's a massive jump, especially if you're trying to save up for your first home. But there is another side to the debate. Supporters of negative gearing actually argue it's helping the rental market stabilize and make it more affordable. Here's their reasoning. They argue negative gearing encourages investment in rental properties. More rental properties on the market mean more choice for tenants, and the increased supply helps increase the rentals. The Australian Property Council claims that negative gearing promotes investment in the rental market, ensuring that there is rental supply for those who need it. They argue that without these incentives, we'd see shortages of rental properties and skyrocketing rents. But the debate doesn't stop just at housing affordability. There are bigger economic implications that you need to consider. Supporters of negative gearing point out that property investment creates jobs in construction and related industries. The Housing Investment Association estimates that for every $1 million invested in new housing, 17 new jobs are created. Other critics counter that there might be more effective ways to stimulate the economy, job growth without distorting the housing market. And this is where it gets more complicated because the housing market isn't just affected by negative gearing, it's affected by a whole bunch of different factors. You've got interest rates, population growth, urban planning policies, foreign investment, employment rates, and heaps more. So as you can see, negative gearing is just one piece of this intricate puzzle. And that's why predicting the exact impact to changes of negative gearing is pretty hard. So as we dive deeper into this topic, just keep in mind there are going to be no simple answers. The effects of negative gearing can ripple through various aspects of the economy and society. So we've explored the debate around negative gearing, but let's follow the money trail. Who's really cashing in on this tax strategy? Here's something I was pretty surprised at. The top 10% of income earners in Australia nearly receive 50% of the total benefits from negative gearing. That's right, half the pie goes to those already at the top of the income ladder. But before we jump to conclusions, let's break this down further. Number one, low to middle income earners. More than 2/3 of people who claim negative gearing deductions earn less than $80,000 a year. But the average rental loss claimed is only around $2,050 per year. When we look at high income earners, they make up a much smaller percentage of negative gearers, but they claim a much bigger deduction. The top 10% of earners claim an average of $15,000 or more per year. To put this in perspective, imagine negative gearing benefits as a pizza. Everyone gets a slice, but some slices are much bigger than others. So why is there a disparity? High-income earners often have more capital to invest, so they can afford to take on larger losses and benefit more from the tax deductions because they've got higher tax rates. It's a little bit like a financial snowball in effect. The more you have, the more you can potentially benefit. And this is where it gets a bit interesting because supporters of negative gearing argue it's not just a strategy for the wealthy. They point out that mainly middle-income Australians, teachers, nurses, police officers use negative gearing as a way to build wealth for the future. Critics, on the other hand, see it differently. They argue that negative gearing is widening the wealth gap in Australia. As property investors who tend to be wealthier benefit from tax breaks and capital gains, it becomes harder for non-investors and first home buyers just to get into the market. Let's consider an example. Sarah, a nurse earning $75,000 a year, negatively gears an investment property. Her tax saving might be around $2,000 a year. Meanwhile, Michael, a surgeon earning $350,000 a year, also negatively gears a property. His tax saving would be over $10,000 a year. Both are using the same strategy, but the benefits are far from equal. And now you might be thinking, but those high income earners are taking on more risk, right? And you'd be correct. Negative gearing involves making a loss. The strategy banks on future capital growth, outweighing those in the short term, a gamble that doesn't always pay off. So where does this leave us all? The distribution of negative gearing benefits raises important questions about the fairness of our tax system and the housing market. Is it widening the wealth gap or providing some incentive for property investment? And how does this impact those trying to buy their first home? Well, let's explore what happens if we scrap negative gearing altogether. The ripple effects could surprise you. And this isn't hypothetical. It's been a real political battleground in the recent years. Let's start with recent history. In 2019, the Australian Labor Party proposed a major reform to negative gearing. The party proposed it would limit negative gearing to new houses only, while maintaining it for existing investors. They also proposed to halve the capital gains discount. It became one of the biggest issues. The Libs argued against Labor, saying it would crash the housing market, while Labor insisted it would level the playing field for first home buyers. In the end, Labor's unexpected election loss was partly due to the policy, showing that how politically sensitive it is. This recent political history highlights the challenges to any reform, but also raises a pretty important question. What would actually happen if negative gearing was scrapped or significantly changed? Let's look at some predictions. House prices. A study by the Reserve Bank of Australia suggests that removing negative gearing could potentially lower house prices by 1.2%. That might not sound like a lot, but on a $500,000 house, that's a $6,000 drop. For a first home buyer, where you're trying to scrap everything together, it can make a big difference. Number two, rental market. This is where things get a little murky. Some experts warn that scrapping negative gearing could lead to a max exodus of property investors, reducing the amount of rental properties available and pushing up rents. And three, investor behavior. If negative gearing was abolished, some investors might rush to sell their properties, potentially flooding the market, causing a bit of a drop in prices. To understand why predictions vary so much, let's take a trip back to 1985. That year, the Australian government did actually abolish negative gearing. So what happened next? It's a tale of two cities, interestingly. In Sydney and Perth, rents actually shot up. In other capital cities, rents stayed flat. This example from 1985 shows us the impact can be varying depending on the local market conditions, so it's not as simple as a cause and effect. And if you fast forward to today, the rental market, even supply landscape, is completely different. The 2019 election debate showed us that a lot of Australians fear any big changes to property rules. I think this is going to be important for politicians moving forward. Let's not forget about the broader economic impacts too. Property investment is a pretty big deal in Australia, supporting jobs in construction, real estate, and other investments. Any major changes to property investment rules could have ripple effects throughout the economy. Think about it. It could be huge. We're talking job losses, drops in consumer spending, and impacts on economic growth if these things aren't done properly. And that is an important point to consider. The effects of scrapping negative gearing wouldn't be felt evenly across the country. Different cities and regions have different housing markets, so the impact could vary a lot depending on where you live. So what's the takeaway from this? Well, clearly scrapping negative gearing isn't a simple fix. Scrapping negative gearing could potentially help first home buyers by making properties a little bit more affordable, but it also could cause short-term pain in the rental market and the broader economy. And the debate from the 2019 election just shows how divided the country is on this specific issue. Which brings us to an important question. Is there kind of a middle ground where everyone can meet in the middle and be happy? Could we reform negative gearing rather than scrapping it entirely? Well, let's have a look at some of those solutions and what's possible. So we've explored the ins and outs of negative gearing and what might happen if it's completely scrapped. But here's the thing, negative gearing isn't the only factor that's affecting housing affordability in Australia. Let's go beyond the hype and try and explore some other solutions. A phase out limiting negative gearing to new properties. In this situation, which was proposed by Labor in that election, investors only claim negative gearing on newly built properties. The good thing is it could encourage more construction, new homes and housing supply. The downside is it could create a bit of a two-tier property market with different rules for new and existing properties and even impact rent that way. Another proposal could be capping negative gearing deductions. You could set a maximum cap on how much investors can claim per property per year. There's even another proposal recently I saw where it was a maximum of, say, 2 investment properties per investor, just to help even out the rules. The negative of this is it might discourage investors, reducing rental supply and potentially making it more unaffordable for rent. 3, increasing capital gains. Currently, there's a 50% discount or concession if you own a property for over 12 months for your capital gains. So if you make a $100,000 gain, you hold it for 3 years, you only pay tax on $50,000 at your normal tax rate. So you're getting half the capital gains for free. If they change this, it could lead to investors that hold properties. This change was proposed where it would be on a certain date forward. So any properties that were owned before that would still have the 50% capital gains exemption. So the downside is it might lead to investors holding onto properties longer because they're still going to get a 50% capital gain. It's going to be better for them to hold longer. They'll get higher gains, make more profit, etc. So it could actually reduce market liquidity and make less properties available for sale. There's also changes proposed to the first homeowner scheme, co-ownership schemes, etc. But this still doesn't help the underlying supply issue. There's still not enough houses for the amount of people living in the country. It's been good to see some changes proposed in Melbourne around stamp duty for off-the-plan properties, but I think more needs to be done around this at both a state and federal level to help increase the supply of properties across Australia. All these solutions aren't mutually exclusive. Many experts argue to address housing affordability issue requires a comprehensive strategy combining many of these proposals. Every solution is potentially going to come with unintended consequences. We saw that with the home builder scheme where the government was giving grants, ended up pushing up the prices of building contracts and made it less affordable to build a home. And it's the same if we suddenly start limiting negative gearing to new properties. It could cause a rush of investors selling old properties, potentially destabilizing the market. This is why a lot of economists are proposing gradual changes rather than massive overhauls. It's all about finding the right balances, addressing affordability concerns without causing unnecessary disruptions to the broader market. At the end of the day, the housing market is extremely complex and interconnected. Changes in one area can have ripple effects through the entire system. So which of these proposals do you think could work best? And how might they impact your property journey? All right, so time to bring it all together and explore what it really means for you. Whether you're a first home buyer, renter, or investor, let's look at some practical takeaways on how to change this evolving landscape. So we've journeyed through the complexities of negative gearing, explored its impacts, and considered other solutions. But let's all bring it together to find a fair solution, one that balances the need for investors, renters, and homeowners. The key word here is balance. Any changes to negative gearing policy needs to weigh up multiple factors. We need to consider housing affordability. How's it going to make it easier for first home buyers to get in the market? Rental stability. How do we ensure that there's enough rental properties for people to live in? Economic impact. What are the broader implications for jobs, growth, and tax revenue? Fairness, how do we create a system that doesn't just benefit high income earners? And market stability, how to implement changes without causing any unnecessary market disruptions? Finding the balance here isn't easy. It's like trying to solve a Rubik's Cube. You fix one side, you often mess up the other. And that's why a lot of advocates say we need to be measured and careful with our approach here. Some compromises could include a gradual fade out. Instead of abruptly scrapping negative gearing, we could look at reducing the deductible percentages over several years. This could give the market time to adjust with any sudden shocks. There could be targeted reforms. We could look at limiting the negative gearing benefits on factors like investment income, the numbers of property earned, or the type of property. What I like about this proposal is it could maintain an incentive for mum and dad investors, but reduce the benefits for large-scale property speculators. Supply-side measures. Any changes to negative gearing could be implemented alongside policies to boost housing supply, such as planning reforms, build-to-rent schemes. At the end of the day, this could offset potential reductions in rental stock. By grandfathering existing arrangements, new rules would only apply on future property purchases, allowing current investors to maintain their arrangements. This could reduce potential sell-offs, which could mean less properties fill of rent, putting up rental costs. I think at the end of the day, what's also missing is complementary policies. Things like increased investment in social and affordable housing, improving transport infrastructure to open up more areas for housing, programs to boost financial literacy and help people understand that they have housing options, and all the government schemes out there. It's crazy, right? There's no perfect solution here. Any policy change is going to come with trade-offs that are likely to benefit some groups more than others, and there's going to be disadvantages to all. The goal here is really to find an approach that's going to benefit our society while minimizing all the harm. I think what is really clear is addressing housing affordability requires an ongoing debate, careful analysis, and willingness to refine policies over time. There's just not going to be a silver bullet. Saying you're going to build 1 million houses over the next 5 years without a plan to do that is just silly. We need to have collaboration at all levels of government to make sure these goals are achievable. Making informed decisions. Wow, so we've deep dived into the world of negative gearing, explored its impacts, and considered potential reforms. But what does it all mean for you? Well, whether you're a first home buyer, a renter, or an investor, let's break down how you can use this information to make informed decisions. Well, first, let's recap what we covered. Negative gearing allows property investors to deduct rental income losses from their taxable income. It is a controversial policy that some argue inflates housing prices, while others say it keeps rents affordable. The benefits of negative gearing are not evenly distributed, with high-income earners receiving a large share. Scrapping or changing negative gearing could have wide-ranging effects on the housing market and broader economy. But what does this actually mean for you? Well, as first home buyers, you want to stay informed of any policy changes. This could impact housing prices or your ability to enter the market. You definitely want to look at first home buyer schemes and benefits in your state. This could help you get a leg up over investors. And where possible, don't just consider the purchase price, consider ongoing costs and potential for capital growth. For renters, understand how negative gearing affects the rental market. It may influence the availability and cost of rental properties. Keep an eye on policy debates. Changing to negative gearing could impact rent prices and the quality of rental stock. For investors, you want to review your investment strategy. Don't just rely solely on tax deductions and make the property investment worthwhile. You want to stay informed about policy changes and how they might affect your investment, and consider diversifying your investment strategy or looking at cash flow positive solutions that don't rely on negative gearing. I think it's really easy to get caught up in this debate and getting really one-sided on either. It's important to think critically about the housing market and understand how interconnected it is and how all these changes can impact everyone at different levels. And remember, while negative gearing is an important factor in the Australian market, it's not the only one. There's interest rates, employment trends, population growth, and heaps of other factors that shape the property market. As we wrap up, take some time to think about your current housing situation and what your future goals are. How could some of these concepts impact your future journey? Are there steps you can take now to put yourself in a better position regardless of these policy changes? The Australian property market may seem complex, but armed with the knowledge and clear understanding of your own goals, you're going to be in a much stronger position to navigate it successfully. But let me know what you think in the comments below. You think it's going to benefit you? You think it's going to be bad for the market? Your future goals, everything else. If you need any help, at Hunter Gallery, the home for home buyers across Australia, so we'd love to have a chat. Hit us up at huntergallery.com.au. And until next time, see you later.